Good afternoon to the UK column viewers and listeners, wherever you are in the world. I'm joined today by another lady who's unfortunately had the experience of dealing with her family, so a daughter and social services. And really, what is incredible for me is that over this year in particular, more and more of these stories have come forward. Now, I've known for many years that there have been some really troubling incidents with social services in the UK going on. But it seems really from probably about 6, 7 months ago that a number of individual cases have come to the fore. People have got in touch with me. And the fact that we have more people now prepared to do interviews, I regard as so important because it's the only way the truth can come out. Because as many people will know, I'm always saying the thing about the family courts is that they're secret. And aside from there being no jury or no press inside the court, normally the court also enforces reporting restrictions on not only mums and dads who get directly involved with the court, but they can also impose those reporting restrictions on other family members. So it does take courage to speak out. So today I'm joined by Claire. Claire contacted me a little while ago. We've had quite a long conversation on the telephone. But Claire, you decided that you wanted to speak out on this. So I'm going to say well done for having the courage to stand up and welcome to the UK column.
Thank you.
Okay, well, the best place to start is always the beginning. How did things unfold for you as a family?
Okay, so in the beginning, um, social services initially did get involved when my daughter fell pregnant, and they wanted to check that things were okay with the relationship. But they checked while her abusive partner was present, and of course, she said that everything was fine, and she didn't disclose then that there was serious issues. Then, obviously, her partner had no part in her first baby's life at all. Obviously, my granddaughter. He wasn't interested in being a father. He didn't have a bond whatsoever. But he made it very clear to her that if she were to leave the relationship, every time they had an argument, he would threaten to have her baby taken away from her, which was very concerning. So obviously, we had no issues at that point. I was helping raise my daughter's baby with her. We were like joint parents together, since she was born. My daughter then got pregnant again. Um, which he did not meet that baby at all. He wasn't interested. He'd moved on with someone else, a different partner. So obviously, up until then, we had no issues. We were just living a happy life, with both the children. My daughter reached the point where we decided we wanted a fresh start because he was turning up outside our house, revving his motorbike, and it was quite distressing for my daughter because she felt like he was trying to get her attention. And we also had, unfortunately, his abusive aunt was living opposite us too. And that had caused my daughter quite a lot of distress because she didn't feel like she was quite free from the abusive relationship. So we decided to move, and we thought we'd move hundreds of miles up north to protect the children and to protect my daughter so that we could start a new life so she could be happy and live in peace away from that threat, because obviously he was a danger, being around the children with everything that he had done to my daughter, including strong violence, coercive control, stealing all her money, also stealing his daughter's money, threatening to kill her, saying that he'd actually planned her death. It was very, very highly concerning behaviour. So before we moved, my daughter reported the whole thing to the police. She actually had a 6-hour interview with the police. And the policeman who actually interviewed her was so angry by all the incidences that she reported about their entire relationship that he wanted to go and arrest him there and then. But my daughter was too scared of the repercussions because of his aunt living opposite us, and we hadn't moved at that point. And she didn't know what he was going to do because he was in contact with some very kind of dubious characters as well, which he threatened to obviously, to set onto my daughter in some of their arguments. So my daughter decided not to press charges, but she made it very clear to the police that we were moving hundreds of miles up north for her protection and for her children's protection. And we were reassured by the police that we were doing the right thing, that if he was to find our location, we could get a non-molestation order and a restraining order, and that we were doing the right thing. You know, my daughter asked many times, am I doing the right thing? You know, is this okay? Can I do this? And she was reassured by the police, yes, you can. Yes, this is good. You're doing the right thing.
Can I just come in there? Can I ask, did you get a crime number when you reported this? Was everything done properly by the police at the time?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was reported. There was a crime number. We had the PC's name as well and his number. And he assured my daughter it would stay on file. And if she ever wanted to press further charges, that he could reopen it and take further action against her ex-partner.
Right.
So we felt very reassured that there was going to be no issues there.
Right. So you move hundreds of miles away too, which is quite a major thing to have to do in order to get away from somebody. But I understand why you'd want to do it. So what happens when you move?
It was life-changing because obviously we'd left behind all the friends that we knew there and our family, and we obviously had to up, you know, everything. I have adult sons as well who decided to come with us also because obviously they didn't want to be, you know, left behind. So it was a big life-changing thing for all of us. We knew we were making the right decision because we were thinking about the children. We wanted them to live in peace, and I didn't want my daughter living with the threat of, you know, constantly worrying that he was going to turn up outside the house to be intimidating, because it wasn't the fact that he didn't want to have contact with the children. He wanted to make his presence known in an intimidating, you know, fashion outside our property.
Right. But I believe that your sons also experienced some of his behavior directly.
Yes. He was actually residing in my property for about 6 months while him and my daughter were trying to make a go of things. And what had happened on one particular day is that he'd been particularly abusive on this day. And she'd asked him multiple times to leave the property. And he said no. He refused point blank that he was not going to leave. He was laughing at her, mocking her. And then he started throwing her phone and throwing items of wet clothing at her, and threatening that he was going to take her baby away. So at this point, after this had been going on for about half an hour, my son decided to go in there and confront him and tell him he needed to leave because he wasn't listening to his sister. And obviously he was very concerned about her being abused. And her, you know, she was very distraught, very upset. In which case a scuffle then broke out between him and my son. And he actually got my son in a neck lock with his legs and started to strangle him, because he had these type of skills where he knows the amount of pressure that he can use with his legs to
He'd done some martial arts training, I think.
fighting, yeah, cage fighting skills he had. So my son was obviously forced to use self-defense to get his legs off, otherwise he was going to be strangled. To which case I then ran into the room and said to him, leave the house now, and shouted at him. He finally left our property, and what he did, he ran straight and called the police on my son and said that my son had assaulted him. So the police did not press any charges against my son. They said that it was very clearly self-defense, and we'd explained the whole incident of what had happened, that he was refusing to leave the house, and obviously my son had had to intervene to go in there. And there was no charges brought against my son.
Right. But this indicates that this individual was not only prepared to be abusive to a young woman, but he was also prepared to take on a male as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, he was, and he felt quite angry that obviously my son had intervened in protecting his sister.
Yes. And just to clarify on the children at this stage, was this the abuse happening while there was just one child, or was there two children?
Yeah, the abuse was happening when there was only one child, my daughter fell pregnant with, well, technically it was their third one. She actually miscarried in between when he was particularly abusive and very unempathetic and uncompassionate when she went through the miscarriage. But when she was pregnant with their third child that she actually gave birth to, she did not see him at all. He moved on to another relationship with another young girl when she was halfway through the pregnancy.
Right, and that had been part of trying to make a go at this very difficult relationship.
Yes, because what he would do is every time she broke free, he would try and manipulate her back, and he would say that he'd changed and that he was going to be a good partner and a good father. Although he never had a bond, he didn't do any of the changing nappies or feeding bottles. Not one single parental duty did he do. And he didn't have a bond either. He wasn't interested from day one with his daughter at all. In fact, he spent all her baby money that she had in her bank account. And also, he wouldn't even buy her a birthday present on her first birthday, which was quite telling as well. Um,
Right. So by the time you move, Claire, how old were the two children then?
so, my daughter's son was born in the late September, and we moved February the following year. So,
Right.
he'd never met his son, and he hadn't seen his daughter since May that year when my daughter cut all contact, and we moved in the February.
And how
Yeah.
old was your granddaughter then?
She was 2.
Right. So two very young children, basically. Yeah. So you move away. You've It's not as though you just disappeared. You'd actually discuss with the police this is the course of action that you thought was best, and they agreed with you. And of course, as you've said, if there was to be further incidents, then you could take action through the courts to get some protection. So you move, huge family upheaval, and what happens then?
Well, we were living really in peace, and my daughter actually started healing because obviously she'd been through quite a lot of trauma through what he had put her through. And she was really concentrating on just being a really good mum, to her babies and, being in a new environment and putting it all behind her. She didn't have the threats or the worry about him turning up. She felt really safe and at peace. And both her children were really thriving. They were doing really well. They were very healthy. They were never ill. They'd been seen by the health visitor 3 times. And on those 3 occasions, she'd said that they were both meeting all their milestones. They were very healthy. They were thriving, and there was no cause for concern whatsoever. And that they had both had a very loving bond with me, the grandmother, and with their mum. She's obviously took note of that.
How long were things quiet then? You move, and as far as you're concerned, things are really settled down, and presumably you feel the pressures coming off. How long did that last? Did that peace last for?
So we moved in the February, and the first we knew that there was a CAFCAS officer involved was in October that same year. Um, and she randomly turned up at the door, and it brought all my daughter's trauma back, flooding back, because she was wondering what on earth she was doing on our doorstep, because obviously there'd been no cause for concern from the children. And as far as she was concerned, we were living a new life. We told the police. So we had no idea why she was there.
And Claire, as a family, have you had any previous interaction with social services, CAFCAS?
No, only when my daughter first got with her partner, because she was underage, they wanted to question whether she'd been coerced into unlawful sexual intercourse. So obviously, what they did though, they actually asked her in the presence of her ex, which is not a very wise thing to do, because if a young girl is being coerced into a relationship, she's not going to tell you in front of her abusive partner. So obviously she said everything was fine and there was no concerns, and she wanted to make a happy family, which is obviously ultimately what she did want. She did want, them to be a happy family together.
Yes. Well, thank you for saying that. the reason I asked that question is because I know that in many of these cases where social services get involved um, in a very direct and I think a lot of families would say aggressive way, there has been previous interaction with them. But in your case, you know, you've explained that actually that was a relatively normal interaction. They were simply checking everything was okay, although, as you point out, they didn't do it in a very sensible way, bearing in mind the relationship. Right. So Kafkas appears and they start to ask questions.
Yeah, she was not a very nice lady. When she came to our doorstep, she was very cold and she was very rude to my daughter. And when my daughter burst into tears and was very distraught, visibly distraught, um, and she said that she'd obviously fled her abuser, the Kafkas officer turned around and said to her, alleged abuse, in a very patronizing tone, which was, in my opinion, a disgusting way to behave to someone that's just escaped domestic abuse. To then basically, you're basically calling them a liar by saying alleged abuse, you know, in a very patronizing way.
And it's also incredible, Claire, because Kafkas's first duty is the protection of the child. It's not protection of the parent, whether it's the mother or the father.
So she said that apparently court papers had been served to our next door neighbour, which is very strange because obviously we said, well, we haven't received any court papers whatsoever, which we hadn't. We even checked with our neighbour and they said they haven't received any either. My daughter was obviously very concerned about where they'd got our address from. And she said that she traced my daughter's address through her benefits.
Wow. So why did the Kafkas lady actually say she was there?
Because it turns out my daughter's ex had actually, as soon as he'd been told by his aunt, who obviously lived opposite us at the time, he got told that we'd moved out. So obviously he then didn't know where we were. So he went to the courts the following month in March, and we moved in February, to file for custody of the children to gain control of them.
Okay, so he makes a complaint, and then the next minute Kafkas is involved, and they've already started court proceedings in what presumably was going to be a custody battle.
Hmm. Yeah. Obviously, we didn't know because we hadn't received any of the court papers whatsoever because they didn't have our address. And then the CAFCAS officer claimed that one of the court letters had gone to our next door neighbour, which is very odd because if they knew that, then why didn't they then serve another one to our address? So that in itself was very strange.
Can I just add there, and to formally serve papers, they've got to be served to the individual. They can't even be left outside somebody's door. They've got to be put in the hand of an individual. That's what serving legal documents is all about.
So obviously we had no knowledge. I then decided to try and get some type of advice because, you know, I was concerned for my daughter and for my grandchildren because, you know, they were very happy and settled in their new life. And we didn't, you know, we were very concerned about the upheaval of what was going to happen next. We didn't really know, you know, what was going to happen. So I actually sought legal advice from, can I name the people? The people's lawyer, and they advised me not to interact with the social services. They said not to consent to, you know, to any assessments or anything like that, or if they came to our door again, to just tell them that we don't consent. So obviously that's what I believed that obviously we were supposed to have done.
How did that progress then? This lady disappears. What's the next thing that happens?
So then we didn't hear anything for a whole year. And we actually thought that everything was all peaceful and calm. We thought, oh, good, you know, she's obviously gone and looked at the police files and discovered that actually there's, you know, 6 hours of statements from my daughter explaining, you know, what had gone on with all the abuse. So they must have obviously decided that, you know, that he shouldn't be around the children. That's what we thought. So we thought, because obviously we hadn't heard for a whole year. That's a long time to then pass, not hearing anything. So next thing we heard was July the following year. we received a letter through the post from the health visitor saying that she wanted to perform my grandson's 2-year check. Now, what was alarm bells for me is that it was about 3 months earlier than his 2nd-year birthday, which was very strange because as I'm a mother of 4, I've obviously had experience with all my children being seen by the health visitor, and they never ever come early for a 2-year check. It's always when they're 2 or after they're 2, just because otherwise they've not necessarily met all the milestones that they're supposed to be reaching, by the age of 2. So for us, that was a bit, for me, I felt a bit concerned because I thought that's very strange. But we decided to allow the health visitor to come anyway to see what it was all about, why she was coming early. When she turned up in July, she knocked on the door and I opened the door, and all of a sudden, the social worker was hiding down an alleyway. She suddenly ran to the front door, and the health visitor looked really sheepish. And I said, "Have you not come for my grandson's 2-year check?" Because I thought it was a bit strange that it's early. And she said, "No, I'm sorry." She said, the social worker wanted me to arrange it early so she could see the children. She was desperate to see the children. So obviously we were very, upset by this, and we felt like our trust had been betrayed. So we didn't allow the social worker to come into the house, but we did allow the health visitor because obviously we didn't have an issue with the health visitor. She'd seen the children previously 3 times. But as she entered our house, she told us that she would not be able to carry out the 2-year check because it was too early. So obviously we were very kind of shocked, thinking, well, why have you said you're coming for the 2-year check if you're not? Now, that's a blatant lie and deception. So of course that would make anyone doubt, you'd feel a betrayal and kind of a lack of trust there because, you've been lied to and deceived.
Well, and these two are supposedly professionals in child health care and child protection. So you would expect them to be meticulous in doing their job in the proper way. You've used the right terminology because essentially they use deceit in order to get into your home. And then it was, from what you've said, it's clear to me that the health visitor was being manipulated by the social worker.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So then what happened? We told the health visitor that obviously, we weren't happy about what she'd done. We said, you've really kind of betrayed our trust here because, we thought that you were coming for the 2-year check, and we thought it was strange anyway because it was early. She then informed us she would be coming back in November to actually carry out his 2-year check. And she asked us if we would agree to that. So we were kind of in 2 minds because we were in a state of shock about what had just happened. So we kind of said, okay, well, yeah, we'll let you come in November. So after they'd left, we kind of thought about it a bit more, and we were thinking, this just doesn't seem right. It seems very, very deceitful. So in November, she turned up at the door, and my daughter asked me to go and speak to her. She said, "Can you tell her, Mum, that I'm not happy for her to continue seeing my children just because I feel really deceived and let down, so I'm not going to continue letting her see the children." So obviously I went and explained the situation to the health visitor. And to my absolute shock, she was really understanding. And she said to me, "Oh, yes," she said, "I know about these mums that are fleeing to other countries to protect their children from social services." So I was like, whoa, like, you've heard about this. So obviously I was shocked she told me this. So she said, "Don't worry." She said, "I'll write you a glowing report because I know the children are very well looked after, and they've got no issues." So I was really reassured by that. And I thought, well, that's good. She knows about what's going on. There's obviously something very kind of dubious going on with the social services. And she's willing to write us a glowing report. So obviously that's going to go in our favour because they'll know there's no concerns. So then she left, and we felt reassured that there was no issues. Then fast forward to February the following year. We had decided to go for a break, and we did a little bit of travelling with the children, me and my daughter and the 2 grandchildren, because we just wanted to get away, for a break to kind of, like you do, from everyday life. And the first we knew that there was anything wrong is I got a very urgent, panicked call from one of my sons, and he said to me, "Mum, the police have broken down the door." And I was absolutely shocked and in horror. And I said, "What do you mean they've broken down the door?" And he said his partner had been in the house, and
That's your house. That's your house
yes,
you're talking about.
my
Yeah.
house. She was house sitting my house while he was at work. She phoned him to say the police have just well, she didn't know it was the police, first of all. She didn't know who it was. She said somebody has just broken the door down. And she was obviously terrified because she was upstairs by herself. So, because they hadn't announced that it was the police, there was no announcement made that it was the police. So obviously my son, thankfully, was just round the corner in his work van. He was able to get dropped off outside the house. He came in to find out what was going on, and there was lots of police in the house. They put him in handcuffs unlawfully. They did not announce who they were. They didn't read out any of his rights whatsoever. They didn't tell him why they were putting him in handcuffs. They then did an unlawful body search on him as well. So obviously he was very distressed. They then started obviously interrogating him and his partner. And he then got me on the phone because he was concerned. He was like, "Mum, I don't know what's going on here. Like, what do I do?" kind of thing. So at this point, we were in Scotland, and obviously we became very upset when we could see what was going on and hear what was going on with the police. And he'd been repeatedly telling them that he didn't want the social workers to be let into the house as well, because two social workers had turned up and they were trying to gain access to the property. And he told them very clearly that he didn't consent. So they'd said that they'd been told by a particular social worker, the same one that's been involved the whole way through, that the children hadn't been seen since last year. And there was a serious cause for concern of their lives, basically. That's why they had the reason to break our door down. That's what they said.
Claire, were these police in plain clothes?
There was a mixture. There was a mixture of uniform, and my son said also there was a couple that were not identifiable. They were wearing just suits, and he didn't know who they were. They didn't identify themselves. So there was a mixture.
No warning is shouted. It's the police, open your door. The first thing your son's partner hears is that the front door has been smashed in and she's got individuals coming into the house. That's truly shocking.
Yeah, she was terrified because she didn't know what was happening. And obviously she got on the phone immediately to my son, and it was just, by God's grace that he was around the corner, and he was able to get here very, very quickly. But then they then put him through trauma too, because obviously they put him in handcuffs, and unlawfully gave him a body search to find out if he had any items on him.
He contacts you and you learn what's going on and what happens then.
So then they made it clear that they wanted to see the children. They said that it had been reported that the children had not been seen since last year, and they wanted to do a welfare check. So they'd already been threatening and coercing my son, because my son was a landscape gardener. He had axes and he had some other like bushcraft tools and things like that. And we also had some pellet guns in the property as well. Now, they were perfectly lawful. Nothing was wrong with them at all. But they started saying to my son, "Well, we don't know if there's been a new legislation that's been passed." They said some of these items might actually be illegal now. So if that's the case, we can actually technically arrest you and check, if they're illegal. So they put him into a corner where he felt like they were trying to manipulate him. It was very, very wrong. He had the whole thing recorded as well. And obviously that's why he then was, eager for us to kind of share our location of where we were. And my daughter obviously felt, a kind of a cause for concern for her brother, thinking, I don't want him to go through anything unlawful, especially after what they've already done, So she agreed to the police. She said, "Okay, you can send police round to our travel lodge where we're staying right now in Scotland, and you can check that my children are both fine." And they agreed that once they'd done that and they found out the children were okay, that would be it. They would leave us alone because they'd be satisfied that there was no cause for concern. So obviously, even though we were shaken up, we were kind of reassured, right, there's nothing to worry about. They then sent round very, very quickly two Scottish police to our travel lodge, and the police spoke to my daughter. And by then, my other two sons had joined us because they'd come up on the train to meet us in Scotland. All four of us got questioned, me, my daughter, and my two other sons, about what we were doing up there. And they wanted to look at the children. They said, oh, the children look very, well fed. They look healthy. There's no cause for concerns. We can see you've got lots of food here as well. So, they had absolutely no concerns. But they said they wanted to get two Scottish social workers down to the travel lodge just to double check that they had no concerns as well. We waited for these two social workers to arrive. It took quite most of the day, this time in the travel lodge of them talking to us and then waiting for the social workers to arrive. When they arrived, there was two ladies that turned up. I cannot recall their names, but they seemed very surprised about why they were there in the first place. And they said, we don't really know why we're here, but, we can clearly see there's nothing wrong with the children. They're both look perfectly, well cared for, well fed, and you've got plenty of food. They've got good clothes and, no concerns whatsoever. So again, we were reassured there's no issues. They've got no cause for concern. So they said to my daughter, listen, we've been informed by your social worker where you live that you've got a court hearing on the Tuesday. Now, this was Friday that this happened. So we knew that obviously we had the whole weekend and up to Tuesday, she said, to get back to our local town where there was going to be a court hearing. So that was it. So we thought, okay, we were really shaken up by the whole day because it had been, obviously very traumatic, as you can imagine, having my house broken into, seeing my son go through that, and then obviously them coming and kind of interrogating us to find out what we were doing. But then we felt kind of a little bit at ease because we thought, right, we can just relax now and just make sure we get back for the court hearing on Tuesday and find out what's going on, what all this is about. The next morning, I woke up and I had this really bad feeling in my stomach. I couldn't shake what it was, but I just had this really bad feeling like something bad was going to happen. But I didn't tell the rest of my family because I didn't want to kind of alarm them. And I thought maybe it was because of the previous day. Anyway, about 12 o'clock midday, there's a bang, 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 bang at our travel lodge. And two different Scottish social workers turned up, accompanied by around 6 police, first of all. And they said they had an emergency court order to take the children. And they demanded, my grandson was asleep on the bed, having a nap. And they demanded that we get them dressed and ready and put them in the car ready to be driven off. Now, bearing in mind that they had never been separated from us, not for one single day and one single night, we were obviously very, very distraught. And we were really worried about our grandchildren, well, my grandchildren. And my granddaughter was only 4, and she started shouting at them, saying, I don't want to go with the strange dangers. I don't want to go with the strange dangers. And she was really visibly distressed. And my grandson was still sleeping. I don't know how he was still sleeping, but he was still sleeping. And they didn't give me the court order. They literally threw it across the bed in an envelope. And I kept saying to them, you're not going to read it out to me. You're not going to show me what it is that you're presenting me with. And they said, you can read it if you want. So I said, well, can you let me read it then? So I opened the envelope and I start reading it. And it said that they had an emergency court order to take the children. And it wasn't signed. There was no signature on it. There was no court stamp. And so immediately that got my attention because I thought, this doesn't seem legitimate. Like, this seems fraudulent to me. So I kept questioning, and I said, look, there's no signature on this. How is this right? And I kept trying to bargain with them, saying, I don't understand why this is happening. I said, do you not understand there's no cause for concern of why the children are with us? Like, why are you taking them? And they kept saying that they were following orders. They'd been given a court order and they had to basically abide by it. And I kept saying, can you not use your moral compass? I said, you must know this is wrong. And I explained to them about the domestic. I said, look, you've got it all filed. I said, we not only filed it at our original hometown, I said, but also my daughter went to our local town when we moved, and she filed more reports because her ex had been harassing and stalking us on social media, trying to find out our location. And she'd been there again, and she'd also given them another 4 to 6 hours again of further statements. So, we thought the whole police force should be aware of our situation and the danger and the threat to the children from her ex-partner. And so, to us, it didn't make any sense as to why they were coming to take the children.
Yeah. Claire, as you talk through this, I'm thinking of other cases where the mums, usually the mums and dads in a couple of them, where children were taken in this sort of very brutal and cold way. And I know from the time one family we were very close to, and I absolutely saw the trauma that this caused, not only the parents, but also, of course, the children. So the child protection system causing the children fear and anxiety, supposedly to protect them. It's quite bizarre, but the callousness of it, I understand the callousness of it because I have seen it. And your daughter, I think we should emphasize at this stage, is still a very, very young mum. She wasn't very old, was she?
No, she was 20 at the time when it happened. And she was so traumatized, she actually had a proper panic attack and she started hyperventilating. And the police said to me, sort her out. That was their exact words, sort your daughter out. There was no assistance. There was no one rushing to her aid. She was hyperventilating and I was expected to sort her out at the same time as keeping my grandchildren calm and trying to keep calm myself. And they were telling me if I didn't hurry up and get the children dressed and ready, that I was basically interfering and I was obstructing what they'd been told to do, and that I would be facing arrest and spending a whole weekend in the police cell. That's what they told me. And then they said, you won't be there then to support your family and to help them get the children back.
Everything about the police and social services action is threatening, it's abusive. And I am also reading between the lines a little bit, but also knowing some things about how these things get done, that there's a psychological aspect to it as well. You're being psychologically bullied. And what do they do? You get the children dressed, and what happens?
Yeah, at this point, my grandson, he woke up and he was wondering what was going on. He started getting a bit distressed because there were so many strangers all around. Now, bearing in mind, my grandson has always had autistic traits since he was born. He was basically non-verbal, and obviously he'd never been away from me or my daughter, and the same with my granddaughter, they hadn't either. So being faced with all these strangers demanding that they were being handed over, and obviously my granddaughter, she was very aware of what they were saying. She kept saying, Mummy, I don't want to go, I don't want to leave you. She said, I don't want to go with the stranger dangers. And she screwed up the court order and she threw it at the police. She was so upset, and she was aware that it was to do with this bit of paper.
Yeah, take your time, Claire, because these things are really difficult.
It was the most traumatic thing we've ever been through in our lives. And it dragged out for about an hour and a half, which again, they got angry with me because they expected us to just literally get the children dressed and just hand them over. That's what they expected. And even though I was very calm and I was staying calm and I was trying to reason with them and trying to tell them the facts, they still said that I obstructed and that I was making them worse. They said I was causing the grandchildren upset. And it wasn't. It's because my granddaughter knew exactly what was going on. She could hear them saying, you need to put the children in the car. You need to get them ready to go. My daughter kept saying, can I come too? And they gave my daughter false hope because she said, please don't let me be separated from them. They've never been away from me before, ever in their lives. And they said they were going to ask somebody if she could come in the car with them, which was a lie. We realised afterwards it was a blatant lie. They had no intention of my daughter going with them, but they gave her false hope. And she kept saying, can you phone up now? And they said, this is what they said, which is really callous. And we have all this recorded on video. They said that as soon as the children were in the car, they were going to make the phone call and find out if my daughter could come as well. So obviously, as soon as the children were in the car, they sped off at lightning speed. Like, I'm talking super fast. It was like something out of a movie. There was no kind of safety, like driving off slowly. They literally just sped. like they were fleeing the scene, you know, of a crime. It was like that. And then my daughter just burst into floods of tears, and we were just stood there just hugging each other and just crying, you know. I'd shouted out to a member of public. I said, "They're stealing our children," and I was told to be quiet. It was, I wanted someone to intervene to help, because I was thinking, this isn't right. I was thinking, how can this be happening? I couldn't get my head around how it could be happening. And then my daughter got a phone call and they said, sorry, you're not allowed to come. And we knew that had been their intention all along, but they gave her that false hope as well, which was like extra, you know, it's just extra vindictive. It's like, why would you do that? Why would you give a mother false hope they can come with their children and then say, oh no, actually you can't? They obviously knew that she wasn't going to go with them in the first place.
Well, this is why I mentioned the psychological aspect to you, because very often when I talk to mums, parents that have been involved in these cases, they talk about this very sinister use of psychology, lies, twisting of the facts, choice of words, which is disturbing to the parents. And it's clear that the use of these sort of psychological tactics are not accidental. They seem to be. It's some parents have described it that it was almost as though they were using a template in what they did and what they said, but you as a parent were a target for some really unpleasant psychological tricks. That's how it seems to me.
Yeah, none of it made any sense at all. And the thing is,
Claire, sorry, just to come back in. What reaction did you get from the police? The car goes with the two children, and you're obviously left there with some of the police officers. What do they say to you?
so I told them all that they were going to be held accountable. I looked at them all and I said, you're going to be held accountable by the Most High. I said, you think that you're not? I said, you know, everyone knows, like, you're all going to be held accountable, because I truly believe that, you know, what you do in this life, you're going to pay the price for. And I said, each one of you, I said, that's been complicit in this, because I said, none of you have stopped this from happening when you could have done, because I've told you the truth and you could have looked into it and you could have stopped this. And they all just looked at me. And one of the police officers actually turned around and said, oh, don't worry, they won't be going anywhere near your daughter's ex-abuser. That's what he said. And I have him on film saying that.
Right. Were they all males?
Mostly males, but there were a couple of females. But they were the majority, the ones who were doing the talking, and the one who was mocking my daughter as well. He was male.
Can you please leave now in Jesus Christ's name?
Please.
You do not have the authority to take her children away from her. She's the mother. No, we're not receiving it. We're not accepting it. We haven't consented. You don't have the authority over God to take her children.
My daughter.
Can you leave now? No, you need to leave now. In the name of Jesus Christ's name, please leave. I need you to leave now.
Right, give me 1 minute, right?
I need you to leave.
What we're all doing here is just we're trying to kind of tone it down a wee bit, okay? And see the fact that we're still going on about it just now.
We were assured.
Bring it down a wee minute, okay? Because we all need to talk to each other quite civilly now, alright? What we'll do is try and not upset the children anymore.
This is not legal.
Can you listen to me a minute?
I'm still
talking. I'm still talking.
Separation anxiety.
She has separation anxiety. They have autism.
Okay? This needs to be done, okay?
These two,
They can't.
they are the people that's going to be physically
Yeah, they don't have authority. You don't have authority. That's not authority. It's corruption.
We're moving on. The authority is
This
there.
is corruption.
The
It's
authority
not.
is there.
It's unlawful. This is
there.
illegal.
Listen to me.
It's illegal.
Listen to me, because we're repeating here. The authority
You're
is there.
stealing
We're
children.
not going to go any further.
You're stealing children. You're
These two
kidnapping them.
It's these two individuals
This is
here
without our
that will
consent.
be facilitating the transport.
No, you're
It would be
kidnapping them.
better
You're
if you could
kidnapping
maybe
them.
introduce the children to them, but it is
You are
happening.
kidnapping them
It is
now. I need
happening.
you to leave in
It
Jesus
is
Christ's
happening.
name. I need you to leave in Jesus
is
Christ's name now, please.
I'm afraid it's
You are
happening.
kidnapping the children. This is kidnapping. You can't kidnap children from their mother. That's evil. District judge sitting in private, no official court stamp, which makes it immediately illegal.
Can we focus on the content, please?
No, because it means this is
Can you focus on the writing?
illegitimate.
Right.
The applicant local authority in Sheffield City Council. Can you photograph this, please? There's no
That's-
official court stamp.
That's-
No official court stamp. I'm just recording that. Okay. You're not taking it. There's no
Josh,
official
people
court
are here
stamp.
from the police and the social cares to take the children.
And there's no official court stamp, and there's no wetting signature. Which
Is it possible for Bethany to go with the children? That would make it a lot easier.
Check it to see if that's allowed. But there's probably a good possibility that can happen. But this is whole thing. This isn't getting anywhere.
I'll carry whatever you need to carry, and you can take the appeal to the car.
promise you'll be brave for me.
With the social worker, so you'll be going. And we'll carry the baggage just to try. I know this is not going to go on at all. To try and make this as easy as it can be.
Take your baby.
And I appreciate it's not going to be easy.
No, sweetie.
Which dummy does she prefer?
Would that be better?
Mum, which dummy does she prefer?
This one.
Right. Which toys would you like us to take to you?
I need to find all his Thomas ones.
This is so wrong. This is so wrong. So careful. Come here. So careful.
What about the push as well?
Are you not checking to see if Bethany can go with
I just
them?
need to get the rest of their toys.
Once in the car. I just said that to you.
No, but I'm just clarifying that with the social workers. I want to hear it from them as well.
You can talk to them.
So careful. I love you.
Have you got your babies? What about the rest of the toys?
They got their bottles.
Anything you guys can have a look at and bring us toys for the next order, but
Bottle. Where's the bottle? Got his bottle. It's green. Silver. Can you go? Have you got the key, Johnny? Go grab Bethany's phone.
Are you going to put it in there?
I'm giving her a cuddle. Be brave. Be brave, darling, okay?
I will find you, sweetie.
Mum,
I will get you back, I promise.
Okay? Okay.
I promise I'm going to get you both back.
Give me a kiss. Love you. Mommy loves you.
You two are going to be together. Please stay together, Selena. Take care of you. I love you both so much.
Steve's going
I'm going to take some mystical stuff.
try and get in touch with Thomas now as well.
Thank you, sweetie.
Hey, can I get one
I'm
second?
going to put you in the car, sweetie.
Okay, see the stuff behind you there. Thank you, and then say.
If your baby big head is going to be held together.
They're stealing your children, the police.
Said you could travel with me.
No, I was double
I
checking.
think that's what you said.
It was a phone call.
Okay,
Let's see
do
if
we
it's
have a
allowed.
contact number for
They
you?
will phone.
Yeah.
I've got the contact number.
I've got the contact number. Bethany, I'm going to phone my manager on my way back, and if you can travel, but I need to speak to Sheffield as well because they have to allow you to return with the kids, so I need to ask them. So it might be another 10 or 15 minutes, okay? I'll be back in touch.
You're lying to us. Okay, that's the way it is. Will we see you later?
Bethany has just been served with these court orders at a hotel in Scotland with a court case that she's been told she has to attend, and it's already happening, so she has absolutely no opportunity of getting there to be heard. It says it's today, the 23rd of February 2024 at 2 p.m, and the time now is 2:30 p.m, and they've literally, the woman's just knocked on the door and served this with Bethany, and she said, I'm sorry that it's already happening now, but I've been told to serve you with these papers.
The children are gone. You as a family must have been there absolutely shell-shocked. And what do you do next?
We didn't know what to do. We were literally in pieces, and we were obviously in Scotland, and the children had just got into a stranger's car that we had no idea who they were. We didn't know where they were going. My daughter was given a phone number And she kept on texting the number saying, "Where are my children? Where are they going?" And she wasn't getting any response and no replies whatsoever. We found out afterwards that that was actually the social worker's number. So she was supposed to have had a duty to inform my daughter of where her children were. And she was not responding to any of the messages. And in fact, she didn't respond until later on, very later on at night, because obviously we then had the real difficulty of getting ourselves in our state of absolute upset and distraught. We had to try and get back. We had to get all our stuff packed up from where we were staying on holiday. And we had to then get to the train station. And my daughter had the double pushchair for the children, which she then had to put our luggage on that and wheel that back, which again was really, really hard for her, because pushing an empty double pushchair without your children is horrific. And I think any mother that can understand that, it's like going to a hospital to have, you know, a child and then coming back with an empty car seat, you know, without the child it's horrific. So that in itself was really, really difficult. And then she didn't get told until really late at night that the children had been handed over to her ex-abuser, who didn't know them and was a complete stranger to both children.
Just tell me that again. When were they handed over to the partner?
So we didn't find out until after how it had actually panned out. But what we were told is that the children had been driven directly from Scotland to Sheffield, and they were met by her ex-abuser. He then got on a train and took them directly back to where he lives in Essex, all on the same day, which would have been incredibly distressing for both the children, especially being handled from stranger to stranger without knowing any of them and wondering where we were.
Yeah. And as you were telling this story, Claire, and particularly when you get to this bit, I'm sat here and I'm thinking, I wonder how the audience is reacting to this, because I can imagine there are people saying, I just can't believe this. I can't believe what I'm hearing. I'm not saying that to doubt you. I absolutely believe what you're talking about, because I've heard it so many times before. But I can imagine people in the audience absolutely stunned themselves to hear what you've just described. And yet this is reality. This is what goes on in the child protection system. So how does it progress from there? Is there a court date already set? When does that appear? When do details of the court appear?
They did have a court hearing, and the really tragic thing is that we were kept away from the children for a whole month after they were taken, which is probably one of the most distressing parts for the children, especially because, you know, for me, what goes through my head is them thinking that we've abandoned them and wondering where their family is, because they did not know their dad at all. My granddaughter had no recollection of him because she'd only seen him when she was a very, very tiny baby. So she didn't know his face. She didn't know any of his relatives. Obviously, my grandson had never met him. So they were all strangers completely, and then being kept away from us for a whole month. And when we turned up at the court hearing, we were appointed a solicitor, which we thought was from the Christian Aid people, but it turned out she didn't even know who the Christian Aid was. And it became very apparent from the onstart that she was very eager to follow instructions given to her by the court and not to look at any of my daughter's evidence, which obviously was highly, highly concerning to both me and my daughter, because we thought it was going to be straightforward. We thought they're going to look at all the police reports, they're going to see that we fled domestic, the police knew about it, and they're going to say there's been a terrible mistake and we're going to give the children back. That's in our minds, that's what we thought was going to happen. And it couldn't have been further from the truth.
Right. And was there just one court hearing? And yes, the other question, which goes tell us about the court hearing. Why were you in court ultimately? Why did they bring you into that court hearing?
Okay, so we found out afterwards that my daughter's ex-abuser had actually filed lies against our family and said that we were a danger to the children because he didn't believe that they were having access to the doctors, and he didn't believe that they were going to be in school. And also he was very concerned that they hadn't been vaccinated. That was his top priority. So apparently that gives the social services the impression that you are not looking at your children's welfare by those three factors.
Yes, and I've certainly heard that before. And I think there are many parents that have been under pressure because if they've had any reservations about vaccinating their children, that seems to almost put them on a target list, or it certainly worsens relations with social services. So in the court hearing then, I'll try not to preempt you here, all right, but why don't I say it? I would assume that your solicitor doesn't present any of the key evidence showing your side of the story.
None whatsoever. No, in fact, they had it, it's like they already had it laid out exactly what they were going to do. It's like it had been all planned and they were sticking to the plan. That's the impression I got. It seems like they wanted to transfer the children to his custody. For what reasons, we can only guess what reasons they had there. But they definitely weren't interested in looking at any of the facts whatsoever. In fact, when I looked through the case, I was horrified that the whole case was built on lies, slander, opinions, and assumptions all the way through the entire case file.
Right. And was it a full day's hearing?
No, it was literally about an hour. That was it.
And what was the result?
So the solicitor came out and she said something very concerning to my daughter. She said the court had said that as the children had been taken, it was probably going to be too traumatic to return them all the way back to where we were because of the distance and the fact they'd already removed them from us. And so that to us was a massive alarm bell because it didn't sound like they had any intention of returning the children.
You say the solicitor came out. Were you and your daughter not in the court? Maybe you wouldn't have been, but I would have expected your daughter to have actually been in the court.
So what it turned out is that while we were sitting outside the court, she was going back and forth, having discussions with the court without my daughter being present. So I'm obviously not clued up on how courts work with the family court, and I had no inclination about what goes on and how it is actually, supposed to unfold. But this is what was happening. She was going back and forth, talking to people in the family court and coming back and relaying information to me and my daughter who was sitting outside.
This is incredible, Claire, because out of all the things I've heard about family courts, I've never heard about this sort of conduct, that the solicitor is sort of acting as a go-between in and out of court, because if you're not in court, you're not in court. This is a key thing. Stepping into the court is bringing you into the family court itself. And if you're not actually in the court, you're not in the court. So there was something very untoward going on here with that solicitor.
Yeah, there was. And obviously I was in floods of tears at the time, and I had been told that I wasn't allowed to get involved, which I actually believed. And, in hindsight, I wish that I hadn't listened to that at the time, because, as my daughter's mother and having such a pivotal role in the children's upbringing, because obviously I've been there since both births, and obviously I was like the other parent, I was doing all the duties of a parent that they would be doing. They told me that it was not my case, that I didn't have parental responsibility, so I was not allowed to get involved and I was not allowed to be inside the court hearing. Now, I later found out that actually I could have been in the court as my daughter's support, but they did not give me that information, which I was very annoyed about.
Yes, you could have been there even as your daughter's Mackenzie friend, but to me it's very clear that you'd got a history of caring for the children and helping your daughter to care for the children. So that would have been a particularly strong case for you to have actually been in court. So a hearing, did you say about an hour? Is that what you said to me?
Yeah.
And then they tell you the children can't go back because you're too far away.
Yeah. And they said they've already removed them now, so it's unlikely that they're going to move them all the way back until the court hearings have, obviously finished, when they've actually decided, what's going to happen, basically.
All right. So, okay. So they were treating this sort of as a preliminary hearing. They were suggesting that this was almost a fact-finding hearing, and then there were going to be future hearings where the future of the children would be decided.
Yes, but we later found out when I started looking through the court papers that they'd already marked both children up for possible adoption, which was very shocking to me, because when I went down the files, it said before they'd even decided they were going to give the children to my daughter's ex-abuser, it said possible adoption. It said yes on both children. And I was absolutely flabbergasted. I thought, how can they both be marked for possible adoption?
I pause because, again, if the audience will absolutely be with you and what you're saying, Claire, how is this possible? Because this is what they do. So we have social services, we have a child protection system, which is a law unto itself. And it's clear that when children are taken for whatever reason, why they're targeted, sometimes you can't quite explain that, but when children are taken, social services simply make a decision as to what is going to happen with those children. Bad enough that they're placed with a father who's been abusive, but then you discover that somebody has taken a decision, say, well, we'll put the children through for adoption. It's some, well, I'll say a mother recently that I've done another interview with who had a baby taken away from her described the process as like a scary movie.
Yeah, that's how this has all felt, like it's not real. But every day I wake up and I feel like it's all going to be over and I'm going to be back to how we were, because the thing is with my grandchildren is that in the night, my grandson would often come across the corridor and he'd come into my room and get into my bed and cuddle up to me in the night. And, after they were taken, I couldn't sleep. I literally spent about the first few months not being able to sleep more than 2 hours. And I kept thinking I heard his footsteps coming across the floor. It's just, I can't even explain the words. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't properly function.
It's grieving for a loss, isn't it? Is what it is. And if somebody dies, to take it to a very basic level, if somebody dies, you know what's happened and the grieving happens, but at least as an adult you understand what's happened to the person. But when children have been taken away, not only is there a hole because they've gone, but you've got this constant underlying worry as to how they are. Are they well? Are they being treated properly? And that is huge psychological pressure.
It was because also we had a really good routine because my grandson was a very, very early riser. So he would get up at 5:30 every morning and I would always go downstairs with him for a couple of hours. And my daughter and my granddaughter would get up a few hours later because they used to wake up later. So I was always down there every morning for those first few hours where it was just me and my grandson, and that was the routine. And it was just, people just don't understand. It's like, because I'm the grandmother, obviously, I was literally like another mother to them both. So obviously, it's hit me very hard. And I keep thinking to myself that, they're going to be wondering like where we are, like where me and my daughter are, why they're not in their home anymore and why they've been put in a house full of strangers.
Yeah. It's unbelievably cruel. And the bit that goes with it, it's quite clear that it's planned and it's orchestrated. This is not just incompetence by a few social workers, because there are too many cases in a variety of different places, not only across England, but in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland as well, where the same pattern applies. So it's like a template operation to actually take children away. And I have come across on many occasions this part of the story, that children are taken away from the loving parent and the loving home, and they are handed into an abusive environment, the exact opposite of what you'd expect the child protection system to be doing. How is your daughter coping with this at the moment?
Well, she's had her ups and downs with it. There's been times where she's really felt like her life isn't worth living anymore. She said to me, Mum, I don't see what the point is, without my children. But the only thing that's got her through is actually her faith, because we have a strong faith. We are a Christian family. That is what's actually got her through. She keeps having faith and trusting God that justice is going to be done. She said she knows that it has to come out eventually, because, everything done in the dark must be brought to the light. We strongly believe that.
Yeah, absolutely. So from that first court case, how many other court hearings did you have to attend?
So we had the second one is when my daughter changed solicitor. Because of the first solicitor, obviously she hadn't been producing any of my daughter's evidence. We decided to find another solicitor, and we did a lot of research, and we found one that specialised in family law and domestic abuse, and we thought this was going to be good. So basically, they took a whole month to transfer from one solicitor to the other, which we thought was very, strange. It's like they were dragging it out on purpose, because the longer time had gone on, we weren't seeing the children at all. When the solicitor then did get involved and she started receiving the legal aid, that's when things changed. So whereas she'd had an initial conversation with us both, and it had sounded like she was going to be fighting for my daughter to get her children back, as soon as she started receiving the legal aid fund, she changed completely. It's like a switch had been activated inside her, and she was like someone completely different. Suddenly, she wasn't interested in my daughter's evidence. She said, oh no, we've got to do what the court says. And it became very apparent that something very sinister was going on, because I thought both solicitors, this is too much of a coincidence. They're both doing what the court is telling them, and they're not looking at any of my daughter's evidence.
What you say a lot of parents discover as they go into the family court system is that basically the legal firms that they think are going to fight their case, fight for them in the court, they eventually discover they're having private discussions with the social workers or even the judge. And the number of families that have said to me, we were just shocked to discover that they were utterly betraying us through the court system. I'd presume she changed, because the moment the legal aid documents had been signed, she was on the gravy train. And, that was the first thing. Is your arm okay? Because I know you're still holding that phone. Do you want to rest for a bit?
No, it's all right. It's okay. Yeah.
So,
thank you.
So you swap legal teams.
Yeah. And then obviously, again, it was very apparent that she wasn't interested. In fact, she even blamed my daughter and said that she shouldn't have fled and not told her abuser where she was going. And we were like, are you serious? So you're fleeing a dangerous abuser, but you're going to tell them where you're going. So that, again, it was very concerning, especially as they were supposed to specialise in domestic abuse. I thought that was a very strange statement to come out with.
Yeah, because it's an inversion of common sense, isn't it? So
yeah, it is absolutely.
You immediately flagged that up as utterly bizarre.
I did, because I thought, there's lots of groups out there that claim to help, mainly mothers fleeing domestic abuse with their young children, and they say that they're going to help them, to be safe from their abuser. So if there's these type of charities that exist, then why are they saying that you can't protect your children from an abuser? You know, to me, that doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so I just pushed this point. So how many court cases in total?
Okay, so after that, my daughter decided that she wasn't going to have a solicitor because, for obvious reasons, so she decided to represent herself. And then they had a remote hearing. And just before that remote hearing happened, we came into contact with what we were told was a private lawyer. And he said that he was going to help us. He was actually able, on the first remote hearing, to speak. And they were grilling him and saying, you know, who are you? What are your credentials? Are you registered? Because they wouldn't accept, first of all, that he was a private lawyer. He then said he was a Mackenzie friend litigant. So then on this remote hearing, the judge said that she had received a very interesting bundle from my daughter, because me and my daughter had decided to put all the evidence together and send it direct to the judge, because we thought, you know, we're desperate. We need to know the judge actually gets all of the evidence, because the solicitors are not producing it. They're not showing it to the court. So we thought we'll give the judge a fair chance to have the entire evidence before her so she can see for herself without being manipulated by anyone in the court, you know, of the truth, so that she would know. And, you know, we were trusting that she would be a fair judge and she would see that and she would realize that, you know, they've made a really bad mistake and that, you know, it needs to be rectified. So anyway, on the remote hearing, she said she'd received a very interesting bundle from my daughter. She then proceeded to tell the solicitor of the social worker that she needed to tidy it up. And then she said she wouldn't be available for any further court hearings.
That's a very interesting statement from the judge. Interesting choice of words. What did you understand from that exchange?
Well, I understood that she could see that this was clearly a great big mess, that, you know, we were showing the evidence of everything they'd done that was completely unlawful, and they didn't have any grounds to stand on to take the children. And so she obviously didn't want to have anything more to do with it. And she was telling the solicitor to tidy it up, to sort it out, to try and, you know, sort the mess out, basically. That's what I took that to mean.
Yeah. I would think that as well. I think that choice of words from the judge was that the solicitor was being warned off to get rid of the evidence, basically. I use an expression, the man on the Clapham omnibus might think that the judge had instructed the solicitor, your solicitor, to effectively get rid of the real evidence as to what was going on.
Yeah, that was the solicitor of the social worker, the same one that was involved all the way through.
I'm sorry, because you said your daughter was representing herself. So yeah, that was well, then it applies even more strongly, doesn't it? Tidy up, deal with it, get rid of the evidence.
Because also what I haven't mentioned as well is that obviously when this started, you know, when they took the children, my daughter made it very clear that she wanted a new social worker on the case, because she said, this social worker has been biased to my abuser the whole way through, because she'd obviously by then read the court files, what had been written, and she could clearly see that the social worker was in favour of the abuser and not of her. So that was very concerning. And she had demanded multiple times to the team where we live that she wanted a new social worker, to which she was told it would not be possible because the social worker had put a lot of work into this, which was very telling. Yeah, because obviously she's put a lot of work into this. So yeah. Then there was another remote hearing, to which it was a different judge. And what happened was we had obviously the private lawyer that had come onto the scene. He tried to speak for us, but they said that he needed to attend court in person with his proof of identity.
Just to clarify here, maybe, or maybe we need a little bit of clarification. This person was essentially acting as an informed but unqualified legal person. So he was acting as a Mackenzie friend, or a lay legal advisor is the other term. And I know there are a lot of very good ones out there. They're very capable, but of course the courts don't like them because if they're very knowledgeable at law, they don't conform to the old boy network that operates through the courts.
So that's the impression we got, because he did seem to know the law very, very well. And they had a big problem with the fact that he wasn't registered. So what they said, they agreed that he could attend court. So this court hearing was actually adjourned, and they arranged another court hearing in person at our local court in Sheffield.
Right.
So on this particular day, the day before rather, this lawyer, he put 15 orders in place. And these 15 orders, he said, should make the judge overturn the entire case and return the children, because he was quoting law at them, and he was using other cases as well to back up what he was saying. And what they did on the day, unfortunately, he wasn't able to turn up. Yeah, he was unable to turn up. He didn't turn up, and he told us not to go in the court by ourselves. And so we stood outside the court for 4 hours, not sure what to do, waiting. And what they did was, a different judge had been appointed to take over the rest of our entire case. Instead of looking at the 15 orders that he'd put in that were very, very important, and they should have held a lot of standing with law, he threw all 15 of them out because he said nobody attended court.
That was the perfect excuse for that judge. Nobody had attended the court, so there's no reason for him to look at any of the paperwork.
So from then, it basically spiraled, because then the next 2 hearings that were arranged, our private lawyer did turn up, but they wouldn't allow him in. They said that he wasn't a suitable person, that he'd been given the opportunity to turn up the last time, but he hadn't turned up. And now they were saying that he was an unsuitable person. And they proceeded to lock the court door and have 3 security guards standing outside the court and wouldn't allow any of us in. And on both those occasions, they then had the final court hearing. And then they also tried to have me imprisoned as well on the same court hearing, the final court hearing.
Oh, and why was that, Claire?
Because I had decided to stand outside the court with a megaphone, and I wanted to make the public aware of what was going on, because I was so just distressed by everything that's happened to our family. I felt like I needed to campaign for justice, and I needed to, make the public aware of what was going on, so I could somehow try and get help, to get everything that had happened to us rectified. And I felt like that was my only choice, was to try and go public with it. So I discovered that Sheffield City Council had actually put in an application to have me committed to prison, because clearly they didn't like, even though I hadn't mentioned the children's names, I hadn't identified them at all. I hadn't spoken even about the details of the case in, detail at all. I was talking about generalization of what was happening, 2 mothers and fathers having their children unlawfully stolen. They'd obviously decided they didn't like it, and they wanted to have me in prison.
What happened then? So the local authority tries to push a committal order through on you. Was that rejected in the court?
No. So what I did was I returned the court papers, and I wrote all over them that I did not consent, and I was not going to participate in their legal fraud, I said. And I stated that I was a living woman, I was not under their terms and their conditions, and that I hadn't done anything at all to break the law. I said I was campaigning for justice, because justice had not been done, and that obviously all these crimes had been committed. And I then listed about 50 of the crimes that they committed in great detail. And once I'd posted that back to the court, they then withdrew their application to have me committed to prison.
Well, that's very, very interesting. Fear, it's a common thing to see in these people. They're very vicious when they're taking children, but when people do their best to fight back, you can very often see fear, and there is definitely fear. They fear publicity. There's no question of this, and presumably this is why the courts are secret courts with no jury and usually no press, and why invariably the judges will be reinforcing to parents that they mustn't speak about what has taken place in the courts. They fear the wider public learning about how children are taken in these Star Chamber courts. So I think you were getting a little bit of a sense of that.
I did, yes. Obviously, they're worried about being exposed because, I was calling them out on the crimes they've committed, which are very, very serious crimes, to unlawfully steal a child from their birth mother, especially for no lawful reason. Because also what I haven't mentioned is that in one of the meetings that we had with the care review officer, she was supposed to be independent. I asked her and the social worker, I said, what is the danger of my daughter being around her children? And there was just this deadly silence. They could not answer me. They would not give me an answer. And instead, the care review officer then proceeded to say, well, we're in care proceedings now, so you just need to get yourself a good legal team. That was it. She didn't give any reason.
Two questions. How long did the court proceedings last? Well, I'm trying to think about the time period from the time of the first hearing through to the last one. What sort of period of time was that?
After they took the children in February, the last court hearing they had was in September.
Right. And so what was that final judgment, Claire?
The final judgment is that they refused to look at any of my daughter's evidence. We don't know what evidence the judge was even shown. We don't know if they destroyed any of it. We don't know what they gave him. But his ultimate decision was that the children would stay with my daughter's ex-abuser and being cared for by his new girlfriend, who's also a victim. She's disclosed that to my daughter 2 years ago. And she's going to be raising her own 2 children and my daughter's 2 children. And my daughter is only allowed to see her children if she attends a particular place which she didn't deem was a suitable place. And she has to call my daughter by a different name because they have renamed my granddaughter, sorry, which is incredibly psychologically damaging as well, on top of everything else. And also, obviously, she's meant to be supervised by her ex-abuser's mum and sister.
You mean inside a contact centre?
No, not in a contact centre. They've said it has to be held at a Party Man World place. So a Party Man World is a place where they have lots of very, very loud music and they have like a children's play centre.
And are these units operated by Child Protection or?
No. It's literally like a social place where you can take children to run around and jump on equipment. Like they have like a ball park there as well. So to be, honest, it's not really a suitable place where you can have intimate time with your children that you've not seen for how long to actually have, proper conversations and spend quality time, because it's a very, very noisy environment with lots of children running around all over the place.
Yeah, and I would say that that's the reason they choose it as an environment, because it's not an environment that you can help restore the bond with your own children.
No.
That environment is chosen because it is disruptive and loud, and you can't have a proper conversation, and the children are distracted. But your daughter would have to be there with your partner's, with a abusive partner's female partner and her mother
and sister, yeah. Which, again, they didn't have any contact with the children when we were living at our old place anyway. They were strangers to the children too. And now suddenly they've been put in these roles where they have complete control over my daughter. And they say that if they don't like the conversation, or if she doesn't call her daughter by her new name, they will terminate straight away the contact. So it feels almost like being put in a bullying, intimidating situation where you're being coerced again to do what they're saying under those terms and conditions, and that's the only way she can see her children.
And Claire, I have to admit here that I haven't heard of this before, where the control is put in the hands of other inverted commas family members. I'm used to hearing that the parents or the mum or the dad was able to see the child within a very cold, austere contact centre, and there was always one or more social services, usually women, present during the hour or the 2 hours that they were actually given to see their own children. So I haven't heard of this before, but it's again, it's got this, to me, it's got this very sadistic psychological twist in it, because to be in the company of your own children when they are controlled by what are effectively strangers, and you're going to have to call your child by a completely different name. This is very dark stuff. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm calling it dark. It's sinister, it's sadistic, it's depraved.
And the other thing that I haven't mentioned as well is that prior to the final court hearing, we were actually seeing the children in a contact centre that was arranged by the social services while the court hearings were still in progression. But they would keep it very minimalistic. So on some weeks we would see the children, and other weeks they'd leave it 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Now, on every occasion, which is what obviously I didn't mention, so initially going back to when they were first stolen, they left it a whole month. And when we saw the children after a month of being out of our care, they were covered in bruises and scratches and injury marks. They were in very poor health. Bearing in mind beforehand, they'd never been sick, never been ill. They used to get like the odd runny nose, and they'd be better within like a day, because obviously I'm very like holistic. I've always brought my children and my family up very, healthily, using all like natural remedies and things, which again, social services don't appear to like that way of life. So it was very, very disturbing to see my grandchildren in that state, and we were horrified. We reported it all. It's all been logged in the contact report books. When we then saw them again the following week, they had more new scratches, more bruises. They had bite marks. Over the progression of seeing them, they started to have missing parts of their teeth. My grandson had bald patches on his hair. My daughter was really upset, and she said, like, he's always had really thick, curly hair. Like, what's happened to his hair? And they tried to just brush it off and said, oh, we don't know, but it's not a concern. Apparently the health visitor has seen it and she's aware of it, and they're not concerned. So they wouldn't tell us how it could possibly have occurred. And it happened about 3 times, different bald patches on his hair. They wouldn't tell us how it happened. He also turned up on one occasion with 2 slightly black eyes that were just forming, not where they're completely black, but where they're just starting to go black. Obviously, all of this has been photographed. As soon as they realised that we had over 100 photographs of their injuries and the bite marks and the scratches and all the bruises and their poor health, they immediately told us that we could not take any more photos. They said it is psychologically, emotionally damaging to the children to take photos of the injuries.
Yeah, and again, this is turning common sense on its head, and certainly there's no compassion being shown by these people in doing what they're doing. It's truly wicked. What words can you use to describe this sort of thing? How long is it now since you and your daughter or how long is it now since the children were taken away?
It was February last year, so it's been nearly 11 months.
And how long is it since you've actually been able to see the children?
We haven't seen them now for nearly 4 months.
And is there talk of you being able to see them again, or has it just gone into a black hole?
Well, we've been sending lots of emails to the social team in Essex and the social team where we live in Sheffield, and they all keep saying the same thing, that decisions were made by the judge in the court in Sheffield, and they're the only ones that can overrule, and that they're not willing to get involved.
We got the utterly bizarre situation here where child protection have taken children from a perfectly loving environment. They pass them into a potentially abusive environment, but that environment turns out to be abusive in fact, and you are recording the evidence. And then when the abuse of children within the wider care system is pointed out, they simply say, well, it's not our responsibility. The judge made the decision. It's well, I'm stuttering because, how do you choose the words to describe this? I just hope that I'm sure they will, the audience listening to this, they're reeling in shock because, of course, this sort of thing hasn't just happened to you and your family. It's happening to hundreds, thousands of other families with children taken across the country. Claire, what about other steps? You obviously fought as hard as you could through the courts. You tried using legal teams. Your daughter tried to represent herself. You used some lay legal help. What else have you done in order to try and get this decision overturned, or to get help for the family? Who have you been able to speak to?
I've been emailing the CEO of the chief executive of Sheffield, and we've had a lot of back and forth emails. But again, they're finally washing their hands and saying, again, if I have issues and that I don't agree with the decisions made in the court, that I need to go back to the court in Sheffield. That's what they're saying is my only option. And that's what everyone is saying. Whoever I contact, they're all saying they can't get involved. I've contacted MPs all over the place. They've all said they cannot get involved with the family court decision.
Right. And yet you are, if you were just saying this to me, the children have got bruises and scratches and other physical injuries that you can't explain, that would be your claim. But you are saying to me, not only have we seen it, we've taken photographs of it. And so presumably you shared those photographs with, for example, the chief executive of Sheffield City Council.
We first initially showed them to the social worker and the care review officer, and we were very shocked by their response because we were expecting them to be horrified by the change in the children's appearance, because I've had other people say to me they look like completely different children before and after. When they initially looked at the first set of photos, which was before they were taken, they were saying in a very sinister voice, oh, how beautiful the children looked. They look so beautiful. They look so beautiful. It was a bit creepy the way they were saying it. And then obviously when they moved to the second lot of photos where you could visibly see how bad their injuries and their scratch marks and the bruising and just the whole deterioration of their health, you could see big black lines under their eyes and their faces were very pale and they just looked really, distraught and upset and not healthy and not happy. The care review officer said, aren't they coming along well?
Yeah. Again, this is unbelievably cold and, well, it's sinister and it's perverse, because what you're suggesting, and I completely agree with you, is that these people are mocking the condition of the children. They're deriving pleasure out of, yes, they actually agree with you because they know what you're saying is true, but they're mocking as they respond in this way. If I say to you, Claire, that many of the mums and dads that I've talked to over a very long period of time now, because I think it's approaching 15 years, that parents say they found the behaviour of the child protection teams, but it could also include the legal teams as well. It might also include the judge. They found their behaviour so sinister and bizarre that they said it's almost as if you were dealing with a cult. What would your reaction be to that description?
I would say I can totally relate. There is a huge darkness. Even just entering the whole family court place, you feel this really dark feeling. It's a very, very dark place. And the people that we encountered, they seemed very, very dark. Even in the eyes, their eyes were very black and they just seemed very emotionless and very cold, like almost robotic.
Yes. And I've witnessed this myself in family court cases. And one particular case I've never forgotten, because a lady pointed out that as far as she could see, each woman in the case, so that was the sort of Kafkas woman on the social services team or the thing, were all wearing black nail polish. Now, I know some women do wear black nail polish, but they were all wearing black nail polish. And it was a very strange little thing. Does it mean something? Possibly not, but to the family or to the lady who was present anyway, it seemed to be very strange. Yeah. You've got an audience at the moment. What would you like to say to the people who are watching this, whether they're in UK or they're overseas? It'll be both. What would you like to say to them?
Well, I just like to say that, I really think that the public needs to be made more aware that this is actually happening, because I've had people turn around to me and say, that they don't just take children for no reason. Now, my case and my daughter's case is a clear example of how they do. They literally come into a good, loving home and they take children for absolutely no lawful reason whatsoever. And I think that should be really worrying to everybody, because it could happen to their children too. Like, the more cases I hear about, I've come across quite a few on my Facebook, and I get really, really upset, because it's unbearable to just think about these children and babies being ripped away from their loving families, and you think, you're going about your daily life happy and peaceably, and you don't expect that someone is suddenly going to come into your life like that and just rip your family apart, because the damage is absolutely horrific that it does. It's absolutely life changing, and the children, it's the children's lives. They're going to suffer for the rest of their life. This type of can only be described as trauma. It is barbaric. It's absolutely barbaric, and anyone that can do that to a family, I think people need to be talking about it, and they need to not be scared to come forward, because they really want mums and dads to be too scared to speak up about what they're doing. I think this is why they're getting away with it, because they're expecting that, they'll send you a letter or a court letter telling you that if you're not quiet about it, or if you talk about it, you're going to go to prison. So naturally, mums and dads are going to be too scared to talk about what's happened to them because of repercussions. And I think this is why they're being allowed to continue doing what they're doing. I mean, it's like a bullying racket. They're stealing your children. They're telling you, if you tell anybody, they're going to put you in prison. It's horrific, absolutely horrific.
And let's add another factor. And last few days, actually, the Daily Mail printed a story in which it was pointing out that the moment a child goes through a family court case, so the child, if you like, is entering the so-called child protection system, about £280,000 has been spent. That's setting up the whole thing, all the experts, the court. And I'm not sure the exact figure of the number of children that are in care at the moment. It's about 70,000. It increased dramatically during lockdown. It may be as high as 75,000. But if the audience care to get a calculator and multiply 280,000 by 75,000, you will find that you're into a multi-billion-pound child industry before anything else has happened to the children. Long-term care, where individuals might be paid several £1,000s a week to care for a child that's got special and difficult learning difficulties, for example. So huge amounts of money. And to be fair to the Daily Mail, to the particular journalist that wrote this story, they pointed out that overwhelmingly the children's homes and the so-called care centres are all now operated by private companies, and they are boasting of the profits they're making and saying it's a good industry to get into. So you've got the callousness of the system itself, where they're effectively taking children away from parents, but very often, and the children are not directly being fostered by another family. They're being fostered by a family who are consuming vast amounts of money per week to do that. So it's an industry. And I also totally agree with you that the agenda is to keep parents frightened and suppressed and stop them, or try and stop them from speaking out. And I want to say that I've been trying for a lot of years to report on these cases, and we have done pretty successfully for some of them. But at the end of the day, it's the number of parents who will have the courage to stand up and speak out that makes the difference. Because if somebody in the general public, or even a viewer of this video, says, oh, well, no, this is just not possible, mum and grandma must have done something, and you say that's absolutely untrue, and I absolutely believe you, if yours is the only case, it doesn't hold much weight. But if we had 10, 20, 100, 200 families coming forward telling effectively the same story about what happened, it is their personal testimony that is the evidence that the British state, the UK government, is stealing children.
And I'd like to mention as well that, I come from a very big family. I'm actually the eldest of 7. And my mum and dad and my siblings have all been incredibly shocked by this whole case, because they've basically been cut out of my grandchildren's lives as well. There's nothing been put in place for them to see them, and they just can't get their heads around it, because they know my family so well, and my friends, they know my family so well. They're totally in shock. It's opened their eyes up, because they never ever thought this would happen to our family. I mean, me personally, I used to actually volunteer in 2 schools in Essex, and I do my regular safeguarding as well. So, this should not have happened to our family. Like, none of us have a criminal record, never had any drug problems or alcohol problems. The fact that there is no issues whatsoever, that's the very concerning thing, because I understand that in some families, sometimes it's because they've had, like, say, drug issues or alcohol problems or something like that. Literally, in our case, there has been nothing whatsoever. And that's what makes it even more concerning, because it means it could happen to anybody. It can happen to me and my family. It can happen to anyone.
And the other thing I'll add to that is that this seemingly used to happen to people who would be vulnerable in some way. So they could have drug issues, or they could basically be poor, or they could living on benefits and having a tough life, or they might have some learning difficulties. And it was poorer, weaker people who were clearly targeted for their children. We've also seen that the targeting has switched to immigrants, particularly people where English isn't their first language. So mothers in particular that don't have very good English, their children have been targeted. I was being pretty well informed of some stuff going on in the Sheffield area probably a couple of years ago, where Romani communities were being targeted for their children. So we've got people who are vulnerable by virtue of the fact they're poor or got learning difficulties, or they're migrants and they haven't got a very good knowledge of the country. They were all targeted. But also in more recent years, we've seen social services trying to snatch the children from professional people. And on a couple of occasions, they've even it's like their confidence is increasing, and they've gone for the children of people legally qualified, solicitors and barristers. And so you get the impression that the confidence in these people and their criminal activities is increasing. So I totally agree with you. The message to the public listening to your story and what it really means is you need to wake up very quickly, because this is demonstrating it doesn't matter who you are, your children are not safe if social services decide to come for them. And if you're thinking, well, I haven't done anything wrong, so they won't come for me, this is absolutely untrue. They target children for all sorts of reasons, including the fact they're particularly attractive children with blonde hair and blue eyes, or even that they're twins.
Both my children, yeah, had very striking features and were very, healthy looking. So it is, especially the fact that they've both been marked up for possible adoption. So, that to us was very kind of shocking and eye-opening.
Claire, one of the things that always interests me around these cases is the reaction from the press. Have you tried to get papers to cover the story, or other journalists, BBC?
Yeah, I've literally reached out to every single media outlet that I could think of, and even the independent ones that I was given names of. I've sent emails to every single one, and I've been absolutely shocked to have no response from any of them whatsoever. And given how serious our, what's happened to us is, I thought that at least one of them would be covering what's happened.
Yeah.
There seems to be like some type of restriction that they're not allowed to report it, or they don't want to get involved, whichever the reason.
All those things. And I think there's also a fear factor with some of the mainstream journalists. They're actually too frightened to get involved, and they know something really bad is going on, but they're too frightened to get involved, and or the newspaper itself and the editorial team is warned off by the judge ultimately. Claire, I think we've probably come to a natural end for this. I hope that you will do some more work with me. I'm going to put it that way. But I think for our viewers today, they're going to be pretty shocked at what you've described. And I know from the comments that come back into the column when we do these sorts of interviews that many people find just sitting and listening to the sorts of things you're talking about very distressing. So there are a lot of good people out there in this country, and hearing the reality of what's taking place in the family courts does make an impact on them. But we need those people to also stand up and be counted. And this is how we're going to do it. Let me just end by saying you conducted the whole of this interview holding your phone. So that must have been very hard, but well done, because I don't know how you've managed to keep it so stable. I think my hand would have been wobbling all over the place. So well done for that, and well done for having the courage to speak to us.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want people to know the truth, because obviously, I don't see how else we're going to get this problem sorted out without making it known to the public what's going on. It's the only way that this type of evil gets stopped, by people talking about it and exposing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's end it there. But we will certainly do a part 2. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian.